In this episode, I talk about inspiration and its overall influence on the artwork that you produce. I also discuss some of the things that inspire me and how I generate ideas. This is episode 7 of Drawn to Create. How's it going, everyone? I hope you're all doing good. Welcome to this week's episode of Drawn to Create, and for this one I actually have something planned. I'm going to be talking a bit about inspiration, and so I've put down some notes here and I'll just work my way through these, but inspiration is quite a broad topic, and so I think it will give me an opportunity to talk about a wide variety of things. I'll probably end up going off on a load of different tangents and talking about things in general, but hopefully I'll be able to bring all of this stuff back and link it to the overall subject, which is inspiration. And so I'll talk a bit about what inspires me and how I produce my own artwork, and then I'll talk a bit about what inspiration is in general, and then how you can apply what you are inspired by to your artwork and how that sort of translates into the artwork you produce. Because I think in a person's artwork there is always elements of, their sources of inspiration, even if it's just a small little hint of that. A lot of artists are inspired by other artists' work, and so whether it's shown through the style of the drawing or the artwork, or whether it's shown through the actual subject, the thing that they are drawing, all of these things come from different places. Everything that is put on paper has a source of sort of like an origin where these ideas and these concepts have derived from, and then an artist sees all of those things and then they are affected by them, and then they apply them to their work. And sometimes they might do that subconsciously without even knowing that they are doing that. But I do think that everything has to come from somewhere, right? I mean, ideas in themselves, ideas are a whole other subject for another episode. But if you think of an idea, it's kind of a strange concept, because where do these ideas come from? They can't just pop in your head, right? They must come as a result of maybe your experience in life in some areas, or maybe the things that you are thinking, and all of this stuff sort of must come together. It's really quite a confusing and complex topic to get into, and I really don't think anybody knows where ideas come from. It's sort of like a gift from the gods, right, that just appears from nowhere. It just pops into your head, and then you try and store that idea, remember it, and then maybe act upon it, execute that idea, and then that idea transforms into something that might be physical, or you create something from that idea that others can interact with. And it's quite special in a sense. Sometimes I have an idea and I'm just like really fortunate to have that idea because it's great, and I write it down so I don't forget it, which is something that I always try and do now, because there have been countless ideas that come into my mind and then just go straight out of my mind and evaporate into thin air again. And so you have to capture them so that you can hopefully act upon them. And I think ideas might come from just everything in general, really. Maybe some of your prior thoughts that you are having throughout the day, and then if you are trying to think of something or you want to do something, then everything is sort of working alongside you, and all of a sudden your mind or whatever generates this thought, this idea, and helps and assists you that way, which is, I don't know, I'm probably talking a load of nonsense right now, but I don't necessarily want to get too much into this idea behind ideas, because I'll probably just talk about that sort of stuff in another episode, because I want to have a conversation surrounding inspiration. And so for the purpose of this episode, I went and Googled the definition to find out what inspiration is, or what it says it is, and the definition of it is the process of being mentally stimulated to do or feel something, especially to do something creative. And I suppose that's inspiration in a nutshell, a really simplified definition of it. but I think inspiration is different for everybody. And I mean, you can think of it as it's almost like a push forward. I think inspiration is a catalyst for motivation. I think those two things are really closely linked together, because being inspired by something can also motivate you to do something. And so, for instance, if an artist sees something or experiences something that inspires something within them, maybe it gives them an idea for some artwork that they want to produce. And again, it's going back to ideas because inspiration is also linked closely to generating ideas, which it's kind of strange because all of these things, motivation, inspiration, ideas, they're all closely linked together and they also assist one another. For instance, if you're inspired by something, that could give you a really good idea for your own work, and then you are motivated as a result of that to go ahead and produce that work. And inspiration for me is probably one of the most interesting things to talk about, because it is different for everybody, and so the only way I can really talk about this is if I talk about my own experience and what inspires me. And there is so much out there that can inspire me. I mean, when I was younger, obviously when you're a child, you seem to be inspired a lot more if you are open to it. But I'd literally I could stare at a blank wall that has been painted, and then the texture of the paint, I could make out little shapes and sort of stuff within the texture of the paint, and then that might give me an idea. It's really you'll sometimes find yourself being inspired by the strangest things. And a lot of the time, you'll find yourself being inspired by obvious things, other creations from other people. And it's everybody else's creations that we can really use to benefit our own creations. Like all of the obvious things that can inspire people, things like movies, games, music, that's a big one, traveling, just life in general, interacting with people, all of these things, they can all be a source of inspiration, and you can probably draw something from all of these different things. Movies, for instance, are something that I think definitely inspired me a lot when I was younger, and they still do now, but I've always been a bit more, I've always sort of gravitated towards more visual mediums. Music still inspires me now and then, but it's probably going to be something that I'm able to look at and see, like you do a movie when you're watching something on screen and you're interacting with these characters, and there's all of these different things that are going on in a movie, whether that's the actual style of the film or the soundtrack, again, the music, the characters, the narrative. All of these things are created by people, and you can take and pick different things out of them and then apply them to your own work. And so, recently, well, not recently, a lot of the time my work, since I've been growing up, has been drawn in pencil. And, I don't think the medium that I've chosen is a result of what has inspired me. I think I've just been using pencil because it was easily accessible as a kid. There was always a pencil lying around with some paper, and so I'd just pick that up and start drawing. That was just a means for me to be able to start creating stuff, drawing on paper, and that felt natural for me. And so I don't think the tools and resources that you use are a product of what inspires you, but I think the artwork that you produce as a result are a result of what inspires you. And so, an artist's artwork is definitely a product of themselves, and it's a product of everything that is involved within themselves. So everything that inspires them, all of their interests, their experiences, all of them are sort of translated in a way onto paper and then presented to the audience through their artwork. And so if I'm going to talk a bit about what inspires me and what inspires the artwork that I produce, it's important to realise that the artwork that I'm creating now is a product of, it's sort of like the furthest end of the process of development that I have been going through for the last, well, pretty much ever since I've been drawing. My work has evolved, and so that evolution and that development has come about from being inspired by different things throughout the years as I have been growing up and aspiring to be an artist and create all of this artwork. I mean, if I was to go back 5 years, I was probably a completely different person back then, and what inspired me back then probably doesn't resonate as much with me now. And so that's also a reason why your artwork seems to develop throughout the years. And if I was to look at a lot of the work that I have produced in the recent years, you would likely be able to see some consistency. And that isn't just shown by the fact that they are all drawn in pencil, but that is shown through the subjects that I am drawing and the way that I am sort of making my decisions as I create this artwork. And so I think that the consistency in my work is definitely shown through the subjects that I am drawing, but then it's also shown through my style of working, adding a lot of detail. The artwork that I've been producing recently, there's a lot of hard surface objects. There's environments which are very hectic and dense, and there's definitely reasons for that, which I'll talk about in a second. But throughout all of my work that I have been creating over the last few years, there is this ongoing theme. And I mean, for lack of a better term, it is a theme, but it's a theme that is influenced and sort of manipulated by all of these different things, all of these things that inspire me. And so an example would be the fact that a lot of my work includes elements of science fiction. A lot of the time it's cyberpunk, which is a subgenre of science fiction. And obviously a lot of you will be familiar with that because it's a genre which has been showcased through other mediums like movies such as Blade Runner, different video games. There's the new video game coming out soon called Cyberpunk 2077, which looks really good, by the way. And I think that genre appeals to me because it has a lot of interesting stuff to offer. I mean, it's so far from real life and the life that we are living in now. It is almost like an interpretation of the possible future. And so you are able to have a lot of fun with that, and that's all I really want to do when I'm drawing. And so all of that stuff is influencing the artwork that I create. And then of course there's a lot of other things which feed into that. I was talking about how detailed my artwork is and how dense these environments seem to be, and I think that was influenced by my visit to Hong Kong. I went to Hong Kong a few years ago, and when I was traveling around, I was looking at all of the buildings, the towering buildings which seem to just go off into the distance, up into the clouds, and it's just it's absolutely it's a crazy environment. I mean, these buildings which soar into the sky, and you just see these small windows, they're just coated. The facade of these buildings are just coated in these small little buildings, and you think each one of those windows belongs to a room and there's a person living in that room. And again, Hong Kong, it's a setting which has inspired the style of cyberpunk, and all of these things are feeding into each other. That's what I was saying about how other people's creations, all of these things can play into each other. And if I create something now from being inspired by the things that I'm talking about, that might inspire you, and then you create something, and so it's like a chain reaction of all of these different things. But yeah, Hong Kong and the density of that city definitely had an effect on me. And there is probably a lot of reasons why, but I think one of the big things was because, I mean, I've always just enjoyed looking at a lot of detail. I enjoy looking at artwork by other artists who include all of this detail within their work. It really does appeal to me visually, and that's just a personal preference. I've always been like that, and some people might be completely different, but Hong Kong as a city was just so picturesque for me because of that. I mean, you could look at the surface of a building, and then this building would just be coated in cables and wires and vents, air ducts, and even that was just so interesting for me to draw. And I think that's why I was so fascinated with that place. And I really want to go back. I am going to Japan this year. I'm going to Tokyo in November with one of my friends, and I can't wait for that. I'll probably do some filming there. I think I'm going to try and video a lot of that, but it's likely going to have a big influence on the work that I create. I'm going to take a lot of photos to use as reference, and again, it's one of those cities which, in comparison to where I live, it's just so different. I mean, it's a completely different way of living. It's a different culture, and again, you'll probably notice that in a lot of my artwork that I produce, I often include a lot of Japanese text and those symbols, and it's quite funny because some of you comment thinking that I know how to write in Japanese, but I usually just use Google Translate. They do say stuff a lot of the time, and a lot of the time it's relevant to the artwork that I'm creating. But again, I think, the reason why that stuff appeals to me still is because of the idea of detail. The symbols and the way that they write is quite ornate, and again, I think that draws back to my fascination with overwhelming detail. And I know that it can be overwhelming sometimes, but again, that's the reason why realistic drawing appealed to me in the early days when I first started drawing, because that had a big focus on detail as well. And as I've moved slowly into drawing from my imagination, I still enjoy adding a lot of detail, and this time it's just influenced a lot more by all of these things which I've been talking about. But yeah, I can't wait to go to Tokyo. Honestly, like we're staying in, I think Shinjuku, which is next to this train station, and apparently it's the biggest train station in the world. We're probably going to get lost there on the first day. I tried watching some videos of this person walking you around the train station, and it just looked so confusing. Apparently there's like over 200 exits in this place, and then there's all of these trains which go around Tokyo and all of these different areas. But regardless, I can't wait for that. And yeah, Hong Kong in itself, when I went there a few years ago, was definitely something that I'll remember. And I will hopefully go back there one day. I could talk a lot about my experience there, but I'll probably just leave that for another episode. But those are a few things that inspire me, and I think I pretty much covered a lot of them. I mean, obviously there's all of these different things that inspire me in general. There's not just like a select amount of things that influence my work. I mean, there's definitely just life in general that inspires my work, and all of these things. Every day I must be inspired by something, I think. I think that's the same for everyone as well. I mean, there's so much out there as well, especially today, just going online and looking at all of these other artists who are creating this amazing artwork and seeing how they do it, looking at their process, and then just browsing the internet and having a look at all of these different reference images and tools and resources that you can take stuff away from. There's really no excuse to not be inspired. I mean, we're living in an age where people are just creating at a rapid pace. There's always new things to look at and new things to immerse yourself within. And all of these, gaming played a big role as well for me back in the day when I was a lot younger. I mean, I don't have a lot of time these days to play as many games as I used to, but games are interesting because they are a really interactive way to engage with these creations. And these creations, I mean, these video games today, they're crazy. Like, they are like interactive movies, and so you can see why they appeal to so many people, because it gives them not only an escape, but they can really indulge and immerse themselves in another world. And that is essentially what I'm trying to do when I create drawings. Even though it's just one image, it's still an interpretation of something, of life in general. It's an alternative way to view life and the world around me from a different perspective. And that has been influenced, and that artwork is a product of all of these things which, develop me as a person and the way that I also interact with the world. And yeah, I think that's what always appealed to me about video games was the fact that you was able to put yourself within these worlds that other people create. It's sort of like going into an artist's artwork, right? Whereas a lot of the time, video games appeal to people for different reasons. I mean, it might be the sense of achievement that they get when they complete the game or are successful at it, or other reasons. But yeah, that was always, I think, the main reason why I, played a lot of them was because I was able to really interact with other people's creations. And I think that's really important. We should always value other people's artwork and what they put out into the world, because as a result of that, that might inspire someone else, and then what the other person creates can inspire someone else. And again, like I said before, it's that chain reaction. And I know that sometimes if I even record an episode of this, and I speak about a few things, the stuff that I talk about can go on to inspire people. A lot of you comment sometimes saying that I inspired you to start drawing again, or I inspired you to create a certain drawing or whatever. And that means a lot to me, because if I'm putting something out there which helps someone else be creative and gives someone else that push that they need, then that's really all that matters, right? I feel like, I don't know, I don't want to get all dark, because this is going to sound quite dark, but I mean, in the end, we are all going to die, right? And all that's really going to remain is the stuff that the result of the actions and the stuff that we did when we was here, and other people's memory of you. And that ties into this idea of legacy, right? And I think I spoke about this in the video where I talked a bit about motivation. A lot of artists create to leave something behind, right? They want to have something that can continue to inspire and influence people in a positive way when they leave this world, right? And if they have something for people to remember them by, then in a way that's their job done, right? And it doesn't even have to be anything big. It could be a really, minor action. If you have ever done something that's helped someone out or whatever, if you have had any positive effect in the world, that person who you have helped or inspired might go on to do something which would continue to inspire other people. And again, it's that chain reaction. And yeah, inspiration is an amazing thing. And sometimes, even though there's all of this stuff out there that could potentially inspire you, I mean, sometimes it's not that easy and that straightforward. A lot of the time, you go through times where you are struggling to think of any ideas. And again, I'm saying ideas because, inspiration is again, it's the catalyst for ideas and motivation and all of that stuff. And so if you're not inspired, then you probably won't feel as motivated to do something, unless it's a task that you are so familiar with that you sort of just have to go through the process of doing it, where you don't need to be inspired anymore because you've already established the reason why you are doing something, and you have already been through that process of trying to come up with an idea for something and, search for stuff that can inspire you. And then all of a sudden you are deep into this project where you are literally creating and doing stuff because you know where it's going to go. And again, things can still inspire you through that process. I mean, you can always make decisions and they are always influenced by different things. But maybe, like with these drawings, I'm always inspired by different things, but I know that I need to create a drawing each week for one of these. And sometimes if I'm in a bit of a rush, I'm just drawing for the sake of creating a drawing. But all of that is still inspired by all of the stuff that I spoke about in this video. But there is nothing really, there's nothing unique that has inspired me in terms of the drawing. Sometimes you'll see me create a drawing where you'll be able to tell that something specific and unique has inspired me, and I'll likely state what that is. I feel like I'm going on and on a bit right now. I don't know if you're making any sense of this, but It kind of makes sense in my head, alright? So I hope I'm getting the point across. But yeah, in terms of searching for inspiration, it's hard to give advice on that because everyone's different. And I mean, if you just go on a website like Pinterest or you just cycle through Instagram, you'll see a lot of other artists' work. And just by looking at a lot of that stuff, an idea should eventually, form itself in your head and it should inspire you, or even this video might inspire you, which I hope it does. But there is a lot of stuff out there that you can benefit from, right, and take inspiration from. And, it's like what I spoke about earlier in this video. Figure out what appeals to you as an artist. Like, for me, it was my fascination with detail. And then from that, I can start to, it sort of reduces the amount of stuff that I'm going to be inspired by. I can kind of almost funnel different things and pinpoint the stuff that I know is going to really spark up an idea. And again, it's probably worth me saying that what inspires me now likely won't inspire me a few years down the line because things are always changing. There's nothing ever that's really permanent. And in terms of artwork and being an artist, it's important to just go with that and allow yourself to develop. And again, I'll probably be inspired by a lot of different things as I develop as an artist, and my artwork will eventually change and all of that stuff. And all of that stuff is just part of the process. But I said in the previous episode that I will do a Q&A, and so a lot of you left some questions and I've read through some of them. I've picked one out. I will do them all eventually. I'll just work through one of them in each episode. And for this week we have a question by Drawing with Daniel. Nice name. But the question is, hey Dan, I just wanted to ask, when did you get serious about art? Right, so, well, I've always been drawing. I've always enjoyed it. I've spoke about all of this stuff before. But in terms of when I got really serious, I think it was when I left secondary school. That's when I started to really take drawing more seriously because, at that time in your life, you have to make a lot of life decisions, and I don't really understand it because from a young age, I think when you leave school, you're around 16 here in the UK. And so at that age, you need to have a pretty good idea of what it is that you want to do when you're older, right? You need to understand the path that you are going to have to take to get there. But the thing is, I never really knew what I wanted to do. And that is probably the same with a lot of people. And I think from a young age, there is a lot of pressure put amongst younger kids to make these decisions when they're not really in the right mind frame to make all of these life-altering decisions at such a young age. But regardless, I didn't know what I wanted to do, and I decided to go to college because that's what everyone else was doing. And I always did draw. I mean, I was always drawing in my free time. But I went to college and I chose some subjects that did kind of, the subjects that were close to the stuff that I enjoyed doing, which was being creative and stuff. So I think I chose design technology. I chose art because I thought it would be an easy A level, and it was, but it was a bit of a pointless one. And then ICT, which is computers, and I only chose 3, but in my free time, when I would come home from college, I would spend a lot of that time drawing, and I'd just draw a lot more because in my mind, I always thought if the college stuff didn't work out, or I found myself in a situation where I still really I hadn't figured out what it is that I wanted to do, I might be able to do something with the drawing stuff. And so I thought that it's probably worth my time to at least practice and get better at drawing, but then also try and do the college stuff as well, because why not have both of them instead of, just doing one of them? And I kind of had that mentality through university as well, because I did happen to go to university to do architecture. I decided to do architecture because it was something that sort of appealed to me. And, obviously I'd always prefer to do drawing and make a career being an artist, but it's a lot more challenging. That's not to say that I didn't try. I was still doing them both, but I've spoke about this before. But yeah, I would really work on my drawing a lot when I finished school, because it was another skill in the bag that I wanted to have, and even if it was just for me, it was something that I enjoyed anyways, and it was just another option, and so I was trying to give myself all of these options, and it was probably the one thing that I was sure about. Drawing has always been something that I knew that I liked and that I would love to, do for make a living out of it, even if the chances are slim. But if you get better at it, then the chances are higher. And so that is one thing that I was always sure about. I knew that I was passionate about drawing, and so I started to take it a lot more seriously when I finished secondary school, because that was the time in my life where I had to make some of those life decisions and, take a bit more responsibility. And so, yeah, I hope that answered that question. If you want me to, build on that, or if any of you have any more questions, then be sure to leave them in the comments down below, and I will read through them all and pick out one of them for next week's episode. In terms of this drawing that you have seen today, by the way, because I have done this drawing prior to recording this, this is sort of like me experimenting for this bigger project that I am working on. I'm just sort of developing this sort of world building exercise, which I intend on doing, but I'll talk about that in another episode. But yeah, I think I'm going to wrap this episode up. I'll probably end up talking about inspiration and all of that stuff throughout future episodes anyways. I also have been working on another realistic rendering tutorial over on the Patreon page, so if you want to check that out, then I'll leave a link in the description. I'm working on some more perspective tutorials to continue that series, and then of course I have this new project in the works, and then this podcast thing is going to be weekly. So yeah, thank you for watching, and of course I will see you next week.